Rain tore through the night like something wild and grieving. Wind screamed through the cracks in boarded-up windows, carried down alleyways, past dumpsters and rust-bitten mailboxes. On the slick, flooded sidewalk of a forgotten neighborhood, a black woman moved through the dark with a plastic bag clutched tight to her chest. The bag was ripped at the seams, but she held it like it carried something sacred. Inside, her last piece of bread, stale, but still bread. Under the rusted awning of an old warehouse, something shifted in the shadows. A child. Curled into himself, knees to chest, soaked through and trembling like he'd already started to disappear. Nobody saw him. Nobody stopped. Except her. Camilla paused, just long enough to feel her own hunger dig in deeper. Then she stepped forward and tore the bread in half. Not even half. She gave him the bigger piece. "Eat," she said gently, crouching down. "You're safe now. I got you." She had no way of knowing that this act, this quiet, aching kindness, would change her life. That this small boy, pale and silent in the rain, wasn't just a child lost. He was a secret the rich would kill to keep buried. By the time Camilla got the boy into her apartment, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from cold. And maybe something else she didn't want to name. The kind of trembling that comes when you know you've crossed a line you can't step back over. He hadn't said a word on the walk home. Just followed, barefoot, dripping, eyes too big for his pale face. Maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell in that kind of night, where everything seemed a little out of focus. Her apartment smelled like wet clothes and fried onions. The walls were cracked, the heat unreliable, the floor always cold. But it was clean, and it was hers, for now. Camilla wrapped him in the old towel she usually used for drying dishes. She didn't ask his name, not yet. First came the basics. Warm socks, a dry t-shirt that hung off him like a gown, half a glass of powdered milk, warmed in the microwave, and the smaller half of the bread she'd saved for herself. "You hungry, baby?" she asked, crouching beside him. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the plastic bag where the rest of the bread had been. "I don't got much," she said, tearing it again and handing it to him. "But it's yours now." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "Aren't you hungry too?" Camilla blinked. Something about the way he asked that. Soft, stunned, like no one had ever told him no before, made her chest tighten. She gave a little shrug, avoiding the truth. "I'm used to it," she said. He ate slowly, careful with every bite. She watched him from the arm of the couch, arms crossed over her chest, like she had to hold herself together. She hadn't brought a stranger into her home since, well, ever. Especially not one that looked like him. There were things you learned early as a black woman in a city like this. People were quick to make assumptions, and slow to offer help. "You got a name?" she asked finally. The boy wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "Jameson," he said. "Jameson," she repeated. "That's a fancy name. You got folks nearby?" He was quiet for a beat. Then, she said, "Nobody's looking." Camilla frowned. "Who said that?" He blinked at her. For a second, his face looked older than any child's should. "The woman in the house, with the long nails. She said, if I disappeared, things would be easier." Camilla sat back like she'd been slapped. Her instincts flared, every part of her screaming that this was bigger than her, that she should take him to someone. The cops, the news, anybody. But she didn't move. She looked at his thin arms, at the way his shoulders curled in like he was trying to fold himself invisible. She'd seen that posture before. In court, in shelters, in mirrors. "You got any idea where you came from?" she asked softly. Jameson shook his head. "I just ran. I was supposed to be quiet. She said I was just Extra. Camilla exhaled slowly. She didn't know what he meant exactly, but she knew how words like extra were used by people who thought money could decide what mattered and what didn't, who belonged and who didn't. She stood up and pulled the old blanket from the back of the couch, tucked it around him. "You're not extra," she said. "You hear me? You matter." He looked up at her, his face serious. "Are you gonna make me go back?" She paused. "No, baby, not tonight." Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, something small and still had taken root, a kind of quiet understanding. She sat down across from him, resting her elbows on her knees. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. For now, there were bigger things to worry about. She didn't know who this boy really was. She didn't know what kind of trouble might be following him. But she knew one thing with aching clarity. Someone had tried to make him vanish, and Camilla had seen too many people disappear in her life, slipped between cracks, written off by the world, left behind without even a headline. She wasn't about to let it happen again. By morning, Jameson was burning up. Camilla woke to the sound of him moaning, tossing under the old blanket on the couch. His skin glistened with sweat, flushed pink at the cheeks. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his small hands gripped the air like he was fighting off something in a dream. She rushed to his side, touching his forehead. "Lord, you're hot," she whispered, panic inching up her spine. "Baby, can you hear me?" His lips moved, but the words came slow, tangled in fever. "She said not to make noise," he murmured. "She had long red nails, sharp like claws." "Who, baby?" Camilla leaned close. "Who said that?" But he was drifting again, eyes open but unfocused. One hand reached out as if he was pointing to something that only he could see. "The needle," he muttered. "She said it'd help me sleep, said it wouldn't hurt." Camilla felt her stomach turn. Her first instinct was to run, to a clinic, to the cops, anywhere. But something inside her pulled back. A warning. If she took him in, would they even listen to her? A poor black woman in a worn-out apron with a sick white child and a story that sounded like a bad dream. She dipped a towel in cool water and pressed it gently to his forehead. Her hands moved automatically, like they used to, back when she had a daughter, back before the courtrooms and the silence that followed. She never told anyone, but grief changes the shape of your hands, teaches them how to comfort without trembling. Jameson flinched beneath the towel. "The boat," he whispered. "She said we'd go away. Said no one would miss me if I just vanished." Camilla froze. Her fingers went still against his skin. "The boat?" She looked at him closely, heart thudding. Even in his fever, the details kept coming. Sharp, strange, out of place. "Boat?" she asked softly. But he had turned inward again, curling like a baby fox, lost in something far too deep for a child. After a while, the fever settled into a simmer. He dozed, breath shallow, one hand still gripping the sleeve of her robe like he needed proof she was real. Camilla stood up and began cleaning quietly, trying to think. She picked up the pile of wet clothes she'd peeled off him last night. His jeans were torn at the knee, the hem frayed with mud. But the jacket, God, the jacket was something else. It was wool, real wool, lined with silk. The buttons were metal, not plastic, heavy, embossed with some kind of family crest she didn't recognize. She turned the collar over and saw a tag stitched in gold thread. Wyatt & Company, Bespoke Tailoring, Manhattan. She'd seen jackets like this once, back when she was clerking for a firm on Fifth Avenue, back when she still had a future in law. Back before her name became a whisper no one dared speak aloud. This jacket didn't belong to a runaway from a shelter. It belonged to someone who had been born into money, old money, the kind that didn't just buy silence, it owned it. She reached into the inner pocket and found a folded piece of thick paper. At first, she thought it was a menu or a map, but as she unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a child's sketch. Crayon on thick drawing paper. A big white house with too many windows. A circular driveway. And in the corner, scribbled with a red crayon, a car. She recognized it. Even crude and lopsided, it was unmistakable. A Ferrari. Camilla sat down hard on the edge of the bed. Her hands were sweating, her mind trying to make sense of things that didn't fit together. That boy on her couch wasn't just lost. He'd come from somewhere that would notice. Somewhere that would cover its tracks. As she stared at the drawing, a soft voice broke the silence. "I wasn't supposed to keep it," Jameson said. He'd woken up. His voice was hoarse. "She said drawings made me remember too much." Camilla swallowed. "Who said that, baby?" He looked down, eyes full of something old and raw. "The lady in the big house. She said, if I disappeared, it'd be easier for everybody." He didn't cry. Not really. But his bottom lip trembled, and his hands balled into fists like he was trying to hold back a storm. Camilla crossed the room and knelt beside him. "She was wrong," she said firmly. "Don't ever believe that." He looked at her with disbelief. "But I don't even matter." Her voice cracked. "You matter to me." They sat in silence a while. The old radiator clanked, and the city moved outside the window like it always did. Loud, fast, indifferent. But inside that tiny apartment, something had shifted. Camilla wasn't just feeding a lost child anymore. She was holding a thread, one that, if pulled, might unravel something much bigger than either of them. She didn't know what had been done to him. Not yet. But she was beginning to understand that this boy had not simply run away. He had been discarded, and discarded things, when found by the wrong people, sometimes disappeared for good. It was the kind of morning where nothing felt right. Even the air. Too still. Too bright through the dusty blinds. Jameson was sleeping again, curled up like he'd finally let himself rest, his fever broken but not gone. Camilla moved slow through the apartment, trying not to wake him. Her bones ached from the worry, and her mind was 1,000 miles from home. She turned on the little TV she kept on top of the fridge, just for noise. Morning news, weather, traffic. She never expected to see him. It was a segment buried between the weather and some story about a charity gala. The anchor spoke in that strange voice newscasters used, soothing, like even disaster could be managed with the right camera angle. "We have a developing story this morning," the woman said, lips painted too red, voice soft like a lullaby. "Police are continuing their search for missing child Jameson Wyatt III, 8 years old, last seen leaving school in Manhattan's Upper East Side." Camilla froze, sponge in hand. Her breath stopped cold in her throat. The photo filled the screen. Same face, same eyes, same child curled up under her blanket. Her knees nearly gave out. She reached for the counter to steady herself, eyes locked on the screen. "Son of a bitch," she whispered. "Oh, baby." The anchor kept talking. "Jameson is the grandson of shipping magnate Frank Wyatt, founder of Wyatt Global Maritime. The family has requested privacy, but asks that anyone with information contact authorities immediately." They flashed the number across the bottom of the screen, like it was just another lost dog, just another public service. Camilla turned the TV off. The room went too quiet. Her hands started to tremble. She sat down at the small kitchen table and stared at the spot where Jameson's jacket still lay, draped over the chair like a reminder she hadn't imagined it. Wyatt. The name clicked in her brain like a door unlocking. She remembered court filings from years ago, divorce cases, sealed settlements, headlines in the background, while she clerked for lawyers who never looked her in the eye. Money like that didn't go missing. It hid. It erased. It cleaned up. Behind her, a soft voice broke the silence. "That was me, wasn't it?" Jameson stood barefoot in the hallway, hair messy, eyes rimmed red. He didn't look surprised, just tired, like he'd known all along it would catch up to him. Camilla nodded, quiet. It was. He didn't cry, didn't panic, just walked to the table and sat across from her, pulling his knees up to his chest. She wanted to ask 100 things. Why didn't you say something? What did they do to you? Why did you run? But instead, she reached for his hand. You don't have to talk, she said softly. Not if you're not ready. He looked down. She always said I talked too much, said I made things harder. Camilla's throat tightened. That's not true. He hesitated. Then, after a long pause, whispered, she said if I disappeared, things would be easier for everyone. Camilla's heart broke open in her chest. What kind of woman says something like that to a child? Jameson's silence was answer enough. They sat in that silence for a long time. It wasn't peaceful. It had weight to it, like something hanging in the air neither of them could name. Camilla knew what she was supposed to do. Call the hotline. Tell the cops. Let the system take over. But her gut twisted at the thought, because she knew what happened to women like her when they told the truth. She'd spent years watching truth get buried under money, under skin color, under reputation. She looked at Jameson, skin pale and eyes dark with things he wasn't saying. She imagined him back in that mansion, behind iron gates and locked doors, handed over like a package with a bow. No, not yet. And that night, while Jameson slept again, exhausted by truths too big for his small body, Camilla sat at the window, smoking the last cigarette she'd been saving for something worse. And that's when the knock came. 3 short raps, sharp, businesslike. She opened the door just a crack. A man stood there. White. Mid-40s. Suit pressed so clean it looked like it never touched dust. He smiled, but not like people smile when they mean it. Camilla Everett? He asked. She didn't answer. I'm just here to help, he said. We heard you might have found something, or someone. Still, she said nothing. He pulled a sleek envelope from his coat pocket. This is a gesture for your kindness. She didn't take it. He offered a nod. If you bring the boy to this address tomorrow, everything will be taken care of, quietly. She stared at him like he was a ghost. You think money fixes this? She asked. He shrugged. Money doesn't fix things, ma'am. It replaces them. Then he was gone. She shut the door and locked it 3 times. In the quiet that followed, Camilla sat on the floor beside the couch and looked at the boy asleep under her old blanket. She could still walk away, make a call, let the machine grind on, but she couldn't shake the man's words. Replace. They wanted to replace this child, like he was a bad order. And that, more than anything, made up her mind. She wasn't handing him over, not to them, not to anybody. By sunrise, she was packing their things. They left before dawn, when the city was still holding its breath. Camilla packed what little she had. 2 backpacks, peanut butter crackers, water, a flashlight that worked only if you smacked it right. She wrapped Jameson in layers, zipped his coat to the chin. He looked at her like a question he was too afraid to ask. Where are we going? He whispered. She looked out the window, where the rain had just started again, slow and steady. Somewhere they don't expect. They took the back stairs and walked 6 blocks before hailing a cab. She paid in cash. Didn't speak unless spoken to. Kept her hand over Jameson's. She knew how to disappear. Poverty had taught her that. You learn to move without being seen, to exist without leaving footprints. They ended up at a bus station in Jersey, where the coffee tasted like metal and the floor never dried. Camilla made the call from a payphone, holding her breath as the line rang. When the woman picked up, her voice came through like a memory. Tasha? Camilla said, almost not believing it. There was a pause. Then, Girl, is that you? It's me. Another beat. Then softer. You in trouble? Camilla looked down at Jameson, sitting cross-legged with his head against the bag. Yeah, she said. I think I am. Tasha didn't ask more. She never did. "Come on," she said. "You still know the way." 3 hours later, they were on her couch in Trenton, wrapped in borrowed blankets. Tasha had aged like good vinyl, tough, smooth, and still able to play you back your own life if you listened. Her apartment smelled like sage and cocoa butter. Safe. "So who's the kid?" Tasha asked that night, pouring tea. Camilla didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out the photo she'd taken, Jameson asleep on her couch, his jacket barely clinging to his small frame, and slid it across the table. Alongside it, she placed the envelope. Inside, a single page, typed. No name. No return address. "I sent these," she said, "to his grandfather." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "You sure that was smart?" "No," Camilla said, "but it was right. She mailed it from a corner drop box 2 days ago." She hadn't expected a reply. Maybe silence. Maybe something worse. But the message came fast. 2 lines printed in black ink. "If it's him, come, but come quietly." Now here they were, rain coming down again as they stood in front of a set of gates taller than any house she'd ever lived in. Beyond them, a long drive curved up to a mansion that looked like it belonged in a movie about old money and deeper secrets. Camilla held Jameson's hand. "You sure you're ready?" He nodded, but she felt his grip tighten. A man in uniform opened the gate without a word. They were ushered through halls so quiet they echoed. No marble out of place. No carpet threadbare. Every corner smelled like lemon oil and power. Then they entered the study. He was already there. Frank Wyatt. Silver hair, spine straight, like he'd never once bent under the weight of the empire he built. His hands rested on the arm of a leather chair, like they'd never had to clean up anything personally. Camilla stayed quiet. This wasn't her room. Jameson stepped forward. "Hi," he said, voice soft. Frank looked at him, not moving. Then Jameson did something Camilla hadn't expected. He turned slightly and pulled up the sleeve of his shirt. "There," he said, pointing to the faint red birthmark at his shoulder. "You told me once you had one too." Frank stood slowly. His face didn't change, but something in him shifted, like a gear catching in a machine. "I remember," he said, almost a whisper. "Your father had it too." Jameson looked down at the floor. "She said you wouldn't want me." Camilla's chest tightened. Frank looked at Camilla for the first time. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, but like she was holding something precious, and he couldn't yet decide if she was protector or thief. "You found him," he said. "No," Camilla replied. "He found me." Just then, the door opened behind them, and there she was, Elaine Wyatt. Camilla recognized her from society columns. Sharp cheekbones, pearls like teeth. The kind of woman who never sat without crossing her legs like a blade. "What is she doing here?" Elaine snapped, eyes cold on Camilla. But Jameson stepped forward before anyone could speak. "You lied," he said, loud, clear. "You said nobody wanted me. You said, if I was gone, it'd be easier. You stuck me with needles and locked the door." Elaine's face paled. "Jameson, you're confused." "I remember everything," he said. "Even the boat." Frank's eyes darkened. "What boat?" Elaine hesitated. "Just a second." But it was enough. Frank turned to Camilla. "How long has he been with you?" 5 nights, she said. And not once did he scream in his sleep. Elaine's voice rose. "You don't understand the pressure I was under." Frank cut her off. "I understand perfectly." The room fell silent. Camilla didn't know what would come next. The truth was finally spoken, but she knew better than to believe that meant justice would follow. Especially in houses like this. She touched Jameson's back gently. He leaned into her, like he had that first night in the rain. Frank looked at them both. "We'll talk again," he said, and Camilla knew what that meant. It wasn't over. Not yet. The first headline hit the morning after their visit to the Wyatt estate. It wasn't on the front page. Not yet. buried instead in a tabloid column, next to a celebrity divorce and a photo of a dog that had learned to skateboard. But it was there, in bold type. Missing heir found with strange woman in Trenton. Camilla stared at it, coffee cooling in her hand, heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear the TV anymore. They didn't use her name, yet. Just called her a woman of interest, described her as unemployed, living in subsidized housing, and possibly mentally unstable. They're painting me like I'm some kind of danger, she muttered, turning the page. Tasha leaned on the counter beside her. That's what they do when the truth don't serve them, she said. They rewrite the story, turn you into the villain, make people stop asking questions. Camilla folded the paper. He told the truth. He stood right in front of her and said it. Tasha gave her a look. You think truth ever scared a woman like that? Camilla didn't answer. Later that day, a different article surfaced online, with photos. One of her, grainy from her mugshot years ago, back when she got caught up in something she didn't even do. Another from a protest downtown. She'd been holding a sign about housing rights, but the caption read, "Radical agitator seen with missing child." They were digging, and they were digging deep. Even Jameson noticed. He sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, eyes locked on the screen. Why are they lying? He asked. Camilla turned off the TV, because the truth costs more than they're willing to pay. At the Wyatt house, things weren't much better. She could feel it every time she stepped through the front door. Eyes following her, voices softening when she entered a room. One of the maids handed her a plate like she didn't want their fingers to touch. The chef ignored her completely. Even the doorman gave her that look. The one that said, "You don't belong here." It wasn't just about race. It was class. It was the way her coat had holes at the cuffs, the way her shoes were worn at the heels, the way she held Jameson's hand in public, like she had every right. Frank Wyatt remained polite, civil even. But Camilla saw the way he studied her, like he was calculating something he hadn't yet decided. He invited her to stay in the guest house, a separate wing near the garden where no reporters could reach. It had fresh towels and flowers on the table. It also had a locked gate. One afternoon, as Jameson watched cartoons on the couch, Frank sat beside her and finally said what had been building. "You have to understand," he said. "This family has a legacy to protect." Camilla looked at him, jaw tightening. "So do I." Frank didn't blink. "There are people who will question your intentions." "Let them," she said. "I didn't take him. I saved him." Frank exhaled slowly. "And I'm grateful. I truly am. But the press... I'm not the one who left that boy in the hands of a woman who drugged him and tried to erase him." The room went quiet. He didn't argue. He just said, "We need to manage this delicately." Camilla stood up. "You mean quietly?" Frank looked tired. Not sorry, just tired. That night, in the garden, Jameson curled up beside her on the porch swing. The air was soft with the smell of lavender and rain. Camilla brushed his hair back from his forehead. "I don't want to stay here," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked up at her, eyes clear. "They don't smile at me here. They act like I'm breakable or like I'm not real. I don't want the rooms or the fountain or the stupid gold tub." Camilla's heart ached. "I just want you," he whispered. "I don't need a mansion. Just you." She pulled him close and didn't speak for a long time. There were no words big enough for what that meant, but it didn't change what she felt coming. The storm wasn't over. The next morning, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the driveway. Out stepped Elaine, dressed in white like she was attending a baptism or a burial. Behind her, two men in tailored suits followed, whispering as they walked. Elaine smiled as she approached, eyes fixed on Camilla. "You must be exhausted," she said sweetly. "All this attention, all these questions." Camilla didn't respond. Elaine leaned in, her voice low. "You can still walk away, you know, quietly." with something in your pocket for your trouble. I'm not for sale, Camilla said. Elaine's smile didn't falter. Everyone is, eventually. As she walked away, Camilla's fingers curled into fists. It wasn't over. The next move had been made, but Camilla wasn't folding. Not now, not after everything. They didn't call it a trial, not officially, not in the way the public understood it. There were no reporters, no cameras, no jury box packed with strangers. Just a long, polished table in a private conference room high above the city, somewhere between a courtroom and a boardroom, and the people who had enough power to decide everything without ever stepping into the light. Jameson sat beside Camilla in a too-big chair, his feet not reaching the floor. He was dressed in navy slacks, a collared shirt with buttons so small they'd made his fingers shake that morning. Camilla had tied his shoes twice, her hands steadier than her breathing. Across the table sat two attorneys, both in tailored suits that probably cost more than her rent. One woman, one man, both expressionless. Frank Wyatt sat near the head of the table, not at the very top, just close enough to remind everyone who owned the room. Elaine didn't show. The man in the gray suit leaned forward first. Ms. Everett, thank you for coming. This is an informal custody mediation, not a courtroom proceeding. But we will be recording testimony today for internal review. Do you understand? Camilla nodded once. I understand. He glanced at Jameson. And the boy? Camilla's voice stayed even. He's not a boy. He's Jameson. That earned her a look, but he moved on. Jameson, the woman said gently, can you tell us what happened after you left your home? Jameson's voice was soft but steady. I didn't leave. I was told to be quiet. I didn't ask to go anywhere. Who told you that? He hesitated, then said, Elaine. The room went still. The woman scribbled something. And Ms. Everett? The man said, turning back to Camilla. Can you explain how you came into possession of the child? Camilla stared at him. I didn't come into possession of anybody. He was alone, in the rain, starving. I brought him into my home. That's not a crime. Not... The man didn't blink. Did you consider calling child services? Camilla looked at him flat. Did Elaine? The silence said enough, but they weren't done. What is your current employment status? I work part-time at a youth center. Kitchen duty. Previous employment? I was a public defender. He raised his eyebrows. That's a significant career change. Camilla shrugged. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you planned. Any criminal record? Charges dropped. Wrongfully accused. You know how that goes. He paused, then asked the question he'd been waiting to drop. Ms. Everett, are you pursuing guardianship of Jameson Wyatt out of personal attachment or financial interest? Camilla leaned forward. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut like broken glass. If I wanted money, I'd have taken the envelope they offered the night that man came to my door. If I wanted comfort, I wouldn't be here. I'm here because I didn't leave him out there to die, and because no one else did a damn thing until it made the news. Jameson reached for her hand under the table. Frank hadn't spoken, not once until now. He stood up. I've listened to enough, he said quietly. This woman kept my grandson alive. Not just his body, his mind, his heart. I don't know what happened under my roof, but I know what I see in front of me. He turned to the lawyers. He stays with her. If you need a statement from me, you have it. No one said a word for several long seconds. Outside the glass windows, the city kept moving. Horns, wind, the occasional wail of a siren. New York doing what New York does, never noticing who gets justice and who doesn't. They left the building quietly. No headlines, no applause. Camilla held Jameson's hand the whole way down the elevator. He didn't speak until they reached the sidewalk. Does this mean I can stay? He asked, looking up at her. She bent down, pulled him close. It means you're not going back to that place. Not now. Not ever. Later that evening, Frank called her privately, offered a monthly stipend, a private school, medical coverage. Camilla listened, then said simply, I don't want your money. He was quiet. Why not? Because that's not what he needs. He needs stability, trust, a safe place to fall apart if he needs to. I don't need a check for that. She paused, then added, but I will ask for two things. He waited. I want my job back at the youth center, full-time, and I want Jameson in a school where no one treats him like a story. Frank agreed. And that was it. Not a perfect ending. Not a big courtroom finale. Just a woman, a child, and a promise made between the cracks of power. Back home, Jameson helped her unpack the groceries, humming under his breath. The house was small again. Quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like danger anymore. But even in the peace, Camilla knew better. Justice doesn't settle in a day, and the people who tried to silence them weren't finished yet. But for now, she had him, and he had her. That was enough, for a moment. They aired the segment on a Sunday evening, the kind of hour when the country was quiet. Sitting down with leftovers, folding laundry, drifting toward sleep. It was part of a local news feature called Voices from the City, a feel-good spotlight meant to remind folks that not all headlines had teeth. Jameson sat on a school bench, sun in his hair, legs swinging slightly. Behind him was a faded mural of children holding hands, and in his lap a notebook he clutched like armor. The reporter, a younger woman with kind eyes, asked softly, "Can you tell me what happened? In your own words?" Jameson took a breath. "She didn't know who I was," he said. "Not at first. She just saw a kid in the rain, and she gave me bread." He looked off screen, then back. "I was scared. I didn't know if I'd be in trouble for talking. But she kept saying I was safe, that I mattered." The screen shifted to a quiet shot of Camilla, standing at the edge of a playground, arms crossed, watching Jameson from a distance. The voiceover came next. She didn't want to go on camera, said this wasn't about her. But around this neighborhood, folks call her something else now, the mother in the rain. Camilla turned off the TV. Tasha, seated across the living room, looked over. "You okay?" "I didn't ask for any of this," Camilla said, barely above a whisper. "No one ever asks to become a symbol," Tasha replied. "But you did what nobody else would." Camilla leaned back into the couch. "That's the thing, though. I didn't do anything big. I just gave a kid food, a place to sleep." Tasha looked at her long and quiet. "That's everything." By Monday morning, the video had made its way online. Not viral, not loud, but steady, shared in community forums, reposted by teachers, talked about by people tired of the same old stories about the same old families. Camilla walked Jameson to school like she always did. But that day, a woman in a nurse's uniform stopped her outside the gates. "You're her," she said. Camilla hesitated. "I guess I am." The woman smiled, a little sad. "My mom used to say, sometimes God sends angels looking like tired black women." Camilla didn't know what to say, just nodded and kept walking. Later that week, the media started to turn. Not all at once, but enough to notice. A column appeared in the Daily Observer. What makes a mother? A podcast aired a 20-minute segment called Black Care, White Silence. But with attention came the other side. Some people called it manipulation, a PR stunt. "Why didn't she call the police first?" they asked. "Why keep him hidden?" Camilla stayed quiet. But it burned. Because she knew the questions weren't really about process. They were about place. About where people like her were allowed to stand in a story. Jameson noticed too. "Are they mad at you?" he asked one night. She looked at him, brushing crumbs from his collar. "Some are." "Why?" She smiled gently. "Because we didn't disappear when they expected us to." Still, something was shifting in the air. People began writing letters to the youth center where Camilla worked. Some thanking her, others offering donations. A few asked if they could volunteer, but just as quickly, the pressure started again. Elaine's lawyers resurfaced, this time whispering into different ears. She hadn't been seen since the hearing, but her absence felt louder than her presence. Rumors started to swirl, that a civil challenge might be filed, that further investigation was underway. One afternoon, Camilla returned home to find her mailbox stuffed with official-looking papers. None had her name on them. All were addressed to Jameson Wyatt III. She opened one and froze. It was a petition for psychiatric evaluation, filed anonymously. "They're still trying to take him," she whispered. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, lights off, listening to the rain. Not like that first night, hard and punishing, but slow, like breath. Camilla closed her eyes. She thought about all the stories she'd read growing up. Stories where people like her never made it past chapter 5. They were warnings, foils, sometimes tragic lessons for someone else's growth. But Jameson had changed that, and now she wasn't afraid of being seen, not anymore. The next morning she wrote her own letter. Not to a judge, not to the press. To Jameson. She folded it carefully and slid it into his backpack, where she knew he'd find it during lunch. The last line read, "When people ask you who you belong to, tell them, a woman who didn't run, a woman who stayed." Because when a poor black woman finds her voice in a room designed to shut her up, she doesn't whisper. Not anymore. We'll see you again in our next story, where another quiet moment might hold a powerful lesson. If this one moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next truth waiting to be told.